Hey everyone, seeing as how I've been at this a while, I think it's high time I step back and take a little while to talk about what anthropology is and what anthropologists do. Because at its heart, that's what pedal-powered anthropology is. It's an exploration of the different aspects of anthropology to sort of educate and get people excited about history and culture and learning and evolution and all that fun stuff. So with that in mind, just looking at the word anthropology, it's made up of anthro, which refers to humans, and logos, which refers to knowledge or study. So just looking at the word, you can see that anthropology is the study of humans. More specifically than that, it's the study of humans and human cultures, both past and present. So more or less, it's anything that humans have ever had anything to do with, and anything that's ever had anything to do with humans. So being that it's so diverse, anthropology is broken down into 4 fields. Each of the 4 fields are broken down further into pretty much infinite subfields, but I'm not going to get into those right now. But the 4 fields are biological anthropology, archaeology, cultural anthropology, and linguistic anthropology. The first field that I want to talk about is biological anthropology. And biological anthropology studies the human organism, the human animal. Because humans are animals, whether you like it or not. And as such, biological anthropologists look at humans, at human cognition, at human anatomy, human biology and genetics, as it relates to and is dissimilar from non-human animals, specifically primates, but any animal as it relates to human. So a lot of time is spent looking at evolutionary genetics, sort of looking at the different changes throughout time as can be inferred from genetic differences and similarities between humans and non-human primates and other animals. And also looking at the fossil record, at the remains of human ancestors and the plants and animals with which they coexisted. To the extent that there is a cultural record, biological anthropologists will also look at the evidence of ancient tool use in human ancestors and in those countless transitional forms of human ancestors and relatives that have existed throughout time. And sort of moving on in scope of time frame and cultural development, archaeologists look at biological remains of humans and human cultures and also cultural artifacts. So because of that, there is a lot of overlap with biological anthropology, but they have a much heavier focus on material cultural artifacts because for the most part, archaeologists are looking at modern human cultures. And they're looking at things like pyramids, but they could also be looking at a World War II battlefield. So it's more or less that wherever humans have been and whatever they were up to when they were there, they've left a trace. Could be biological remains of themselves or animals that they've eaten or whatever. Or it could be cultural artifacts, tools, buildings, foundations, written record, what have you. But the archaeologist is mostly concerned with recreating the past as it existed in a given place and recreating sort of the day-to-day lives of individuals from societies that aren't really around anymore. Next field I want to talk about is cultural anthropology. And I think cultural anthropology kind of has this romanticized stereotype of the person sort of hacking their way through the jungle and running into and living with an uncontacted tribe and learning all their languages and customs and rituals. And I guess historically that's been at least partially true. And cultural anthropologists do live with and study tribes today, both to just learn about them, but also to look at the impacts of modern advances on their societies. And because of that, cultural anthropologists will sort of serve as an intermediary between a tribe and a governmental entity in order to sort of bridge that language gap between what does this government want from us and how does this tribe understand things like property ownership. So there still is that stereotypical living with a tribe aspect of cultural anthropology, but nowadays cultural anthropologists also do, maybe even primarily do, a lot more sort of relatable, almost to the point of mundane studies. And a good example of that is a study that I did myself a few years ago where I looked at traffic. And basically, I went to a bunch of different intersections and I sat down on the sidewalk and the light turned red and watched a row of cars build up. And I was focused primarily on the first person in that row of cars. And when the light turned green, I made note of whether they were distracted or attentive. And through that, I was able to calculate the difference in time to clear an intersection for distracted versus attentive drivers. And it was a few second difference, not that big on an individual level. But I was able to expand upon that to get an average percentage of drivers distracted and apply that to average drivers in my city and county. And from that, I was able to give a pretty good idea of the fuel wasted, both in gallons and dollars, when a light turns green and you just sit there looking at your phone or combing your hair or whatever. So just that little window gives a very good glimpse into something that everybody can relate to. And I looked at gallons and cost in dollars, but obviously that has a very real environmental impact. There's a lot of implications from a study like this, and it's easily replicated, but you don't have to be an environmentalist to care about it. I think everybody who drives wants to spend less on gas, and drive or not, I think everybody has probably been impacted by distracted drivers at some point. I know as a cyclist, I'm impacted multiple times a day by drivers who just have something else that's way more important than operating a multi-ton hunk of steel that's going like 40 miles an hour. But it's a small example, it's a single example, but I think it's a pretty good example of what it is that cultural anthropologists do that can be readily understood and related to by people who may not have even heard of anthropology before this video. Lastly, I want to talk about anthropological linguistics. And anthropological linguistics studies language and its relationship with culture and the ways culture shapes language and language in turn shapes culture. And anthropological linguistics is particularly fascinating to me because language in and of itself is an abstract idea. There's no concrete object that is language before language is invented. A rock is a rock, a tree is a tree. You don't need to know English to know that what I'm on is a bike. You might not know the word for it, but you probably understand the mechanism anyway. So it's not a concrete object, it's an abstract concept. And because of that, it's sort of interwoven throughout all of the other fields of anthropology. And as far as culture is concerned, I think it's pretty obvious how it ties into culture. Because I already said they're inextricably linked. They're kind of symbiotic with one another. Culture influences language, and language shapes culture. So that one is pretty obvious and easy to explain. The other two, maybe a little less so. But when you look at archaeology, I mean, aside from written records that are obvious, okay, that's evidence of language. But beyond the written record, as it concerns archaeologists, a lot of the evidence of what they're looking at can't have occurred without the existence of human language. Or at least, if it can occur without the existence of human language, we've yet to see any evidence of it. And basically what I mean by that is language has a cumulative impact on culture. When you look at something like art, or like clothing, or stone tools, or regional stylizations of fish hooks or spear points, all of that is evidence of a complex culture. And when you look at even more complex aspects of it, when you look at obvious examples of cultures with hierarchical governments, or you look at different buildings, or like a pyramid. To construct a pyramid, you need a pretty advanced understanding of engineering. Engineering doesn't exist before language, it just doesn't. You're not going to take a group of people from a pre-linguistic social group who have no idea what a pyramid is and have them sit there and sort of gesture in order to sort of hash out how to build a pyramid. I mean, even if they could do it in an experiment, there's no amount of free time that exists that would allow that kind of thing to happen. It comes down to it when you have language. Say this generation, my generation, came up with language. It means that whatever else we come up with, language included, but any technological innovations, any use of tools or fishing techniques or whatever, we can just tell our offspring, a parent generation with language, anything that they innovate, they can vocally transmit the concept of without the need for trial and error and independent discovery by the child generation. So that means that each generation starts off at the high point of cultural innovation for their parent generation, and they go from there. So each generation, the cultural developments accumulate, and they build and build and build, and that's how language shapes a civilization's ability to develop engineering. So even though it may not seem obvious at first, when you're looking at evidence for human civilization in the fossil record, in the archaeological record, you're almost by default looking at evidence for complex human language. And it's similar with biological anthropology. There are biological aspects to speech, both physical and anatomical, in that your vocal tract, the bones and muscles and orientation thereof, is situated in a way that allows you to articulate speech. And that has implications evolutionarily, because we didn't pop into being as humans capable of human speech. As the need for more complex communication developed, those social groups and those individuals more capable of articulating more complex speech were better at communicating and better at exploiting resources and fared better in conflict with groups that were more poorly adapted to articulating speech. And that's a gross oversimplification, but it's not entirely inaccurate. Something that is better equipped for speech is going to fare better in an environment that favors speech. And similarly with brain structures, in that your brain has different regions, different structures that have developed and are indicative of the creation and processing and storing of human language. And that's evident not only in your brain, but also to a certain extent in your brain case, in the areas of your skull where those regions bump up against it. So we can study that kind of cognition to a limited degree in the fossil record and the archaeological record. So because of that, linguistics sort of is a thread that ties everything together, but it's also distinct enough to require its own field of study. So in a nutshell, those are the four fields of anthropology. I want to get more into them individually in subsequent videos, have a video or a few videos devoted individually to each field, and if you're still watching, I'm assuming you're pretty interested. And if you are interested and I haven't posted those videos yet, or if I have posted the videos already, but if you're interested in anything I've said, whether it's something that I've mentioned specifically, or whether it's something you just want me to go on about in general, let me know. And if I haven't made the videos yet, I can include them in the videos. Or if I have made the videos already, maybe I can make another one. But I want to get people interested and get people curious and get people wanting to learn about anthropology and all the cool stuff that anthropologists do, in the hope that maybe a few more people see anthropology as a bit more than a high-ranking number on one of those lists of most regretted college degrees. So I hope you found all of this interesting. If you're still watching, I'm assuming you have. If you haven't, I'm sorry, because it doesn't get better from here. But in any event, that's all for today. Any questions or comments, or if you want to yell at me about something, just go right on ahead. And in any event, thanks for watching.